immensely grateful to my friend, Mr. Fortenberry, for bringing this point home. It's a point that has been brought home repeatedly to me in different places in the world. In Afghanistan, where this country helped with a constitution that would be Sharia law based. My country where Americans have fought and died for freedom. My country where the most valuable commodity we have, human life, has been sacrificed on the altar of freedom. Because we believed where there was a threat like Afghanistan to us as Americans, we could repel the Taliban and the world would benefit, and certainly America would benefit, and Christians around the world would benefit who were being so persecuted by the Taliban in control in Afghanistan. But we weren't alone. Moderate Muslims in Afghanistan were being persecuted. That's why there were plenty of groups willing to rise and fight with America, for America, against the radical Islamists of the Taliban. The moderate Muslims didn't want radical Islamists running their country. They were perfectly willing to allow Christians or Buddhists or secularists, Jews, to live and worship or not worship as they saw fit in their country. So the people that some in this administration call war criminals, the Northern Alliance, fought for us. And they defeated the Taliban in a matter of months. It was in October of 2001, a month or so after the worst attack on the United States in our history. Killed over 3,000 people here in our homeland. We finally figured out planning and preparation occurred in Afghanistan. And there did have to be some diplomatic negotiations to get some of the tribes to be willing to fight together because they didn't like each other sufficiently, at least, to work together and be under each other's control and command. And diplomatically, there may have been some money changed hands, we're told, to get one tribal leader to subjugate to another. General Dustin, legendary in the region, in the whole continent, for courage, led. We had less than 500, around 300 or so, embedded military, special ops guys, as well as intelligence. And within about 4 or 5 months, the team were totally routed, totally defeated. And then the administration, under the leadership of the State Department, decided the best thing for Afghanistan would be to have a stovepipe, centralized, top-heavy government. Even though this was a regional, tribal country, had been for millennia. That was a mistake that was not the Obama administration's. That happened before President Obama took office. But from those I talked with, they could see problems, and I believe if there had been a President Bush clone, he'd have been willing to admit we needed a change. But the new president accepted Afghanistan with its top-heavy government, where the president can appoint the governors, appoint the mayors, appoint the police chief, appoint the highest level teachers, appoint a slate of a big portion of the legislature. Incredible powers. If you were looking for a formula that would help you create corruption, we helped provide it to the Afghans. If you were looking for an environment that could be created that would encourage corruption, we helped provide it to the Afghans. Well, everybody makes mistakes. But the important thing is, after you've made them, recognize them and correct them. And instead, this administration came in and really doubled down and on the top-heavy, corrupt Karzai administration. As a result, synagogues really can't be found in Afghanistan. Christian churches, it will be hard-pressed to find a church in Afghanistan. Not that they're not there somewhere, but the Taliban, one of whose leaders has been on national television in Afghanistan on behalf of the Taliban, citing Sharia law and basically announcing, if you've been opposing the Taliban, if you've not actually supported us, then everyone knows when the Americans leave, which will be this year, then we, the Taliban, will be back in charge here in Afghanistan. So under Sharia law, you must come to us, admit your mistakes, ask forgiveness, and ask for our protection, swear allegiance to the Taliban. We'll forgive you and we'll provide you protection, but you fail to do so, then you'll be fodder for death. So we have helped create the situation in Afghanistan under this administration where now, if you're not going to be a radical Islamist, your life is going to be miserable, which were the conditions in Afghanistan before we went in. We have set up a situation in Afghanistan that will be ripe for further Taliban development, further Taliban training and planning for a more glorious 9/11 attack that can and would kill more Americans. And although that would most likely occur after this president leaves office, it would only be the mainstream media who would not recognize that it was this administration that made this possible. Yes, the Bush administration would have contributed some by the government so centralized that was set up, but all but the most deaf and blind to the mistakes of the current administration would say the Bush administration never would have allowed it to get this point in Afghanistan, where Christians and Jews have to fear for their lives, where moderate Muslims have to fear for their lives, and where those who fought for and with America will likely be killed. Now, knowing some of these people, Mr. Speaker, I can assure you they're not going to go down without a fight. So most likely, our president here in the United States, by his siding with the bullies, is likely to contribute to a massive, ugly, destructive civil war in Afghanistan. But it's one of the situations that's led our allies around the world to say, wait a minute, the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan fought for America. They fought for you. They defeated radical Islamic Taliban in Afghanistan, they were defeated. They were overrun. That last incredible battle where General Dustin, and I've talked with him personally about it in Afghanistan, how he knew that they couldn't send tanks up to this last fortification of the Taliban because they could get blown up and they'd block the way up. He knew that he couldn't send massive numbers of infantry until eventually they prevailed because they're fighting uphill against artillery, rocket-propelled grenades, and gunfire, and they wouldn't have a chance no matter how many they sent. He felt the only chance was if they put the 1,000 fastest, most courageous, best horseback riders they had on horses and sent them uphill into this Taliban stronghold. And they did. And these 1,000 courageous freedom fighters, Muslims who wanted freedom from these cruel, uncivilized, brutal beasts called the Taliban, they wanted them defeated, and they went after them, riding as fast as they can. They head up the hill, rocket-propelled grenades, artillery, gunfire coming their way, and they lost 30% of the 1,000 riders. They didn't slow down. They didn't stop. They didn't watch and see as someone fell. They knew their only chance of victory was to keep heading up that hill to the fortification. And around 700 got there and wiped out the Taliban, destroyed the last fortification, the last stronghold of the Taliban, and there was victory in Afghanistan. And now, all these years later, 12 years later, with an administration that keeps helping the bullies of the world and hurting those who are oppressed in the world, the Taliban is poised to take back over. And our allies are wondering, why did we trust you? Why did we fight with you? You said when we defeated the Taliban for you that we could trust you. We could give you our weapons because we had nothing to fear. The United States would always stand with us and make sure the Taliban would never take back over. And now, 12 years after we trusted you, we put our lives in your hand. We gave these weapons to you. You're turning your back on us in Afghanistan that fought for you and with you, lost family, lost limbs, fighting for you and with you, and now you're going to walk away and leave this country to fall back in the hands of the Taliban. We're not going to let it happen without a fight. But we can't believe you would do this to someone to whom you said, hey, trust us, you can trust us. And we did. And now the current administration is turning its back on us, calling us war criminals. Other allies around the world see this. And they say, wow, we can't say this to Secretary of State Kerry. We couldn't say it to Secretary of State Clinton. We couldn't say this to President Obama. Well, we can say this to you. We trust you, but we're wondering if we're going to be the next allies to be thrown under the bus. People around the world are saying, seems pretty clear, you can't trust the United States or you'll pay with your life. That's not the America that gained the trust and respect around the world from everyone except the radical Islamists and some in the mainstream media. The America that became the most free, the most affluent nation in world history has also been the most generous nation in world history. and what we've done and given and lost on behalf of other people, not to create an empire, not to build an empire, not to force people to speak English and to follow American ways, but so they could be free to choose the way in which they should go. Countries historically have not done that, and we have. And now, that generous nature has been used by this administration until it's become a vice. A vice that would allow our allies to be killed, to be oppressed and persecuted, because we're going to let the bullies take over. Not only did we watch and let bullies take over in other parts of the world, we saw the Arab Spring that in the not-so-distant future would become a Christian and Jewish winter, a bleak, miserable winter for Jews and Christians and secularists. And we demanded that the leader of Egypt be ousted. Never mind that this administration had agreements with the Egyptian leader, president. We turned our back on them. And how about after the Soviet Union fell and the United States, particularly the Clinton administration, as I understand it, were the ones that guaranteed Ukraine that if you will give up the nuclear weapons that you hold and allow us to provide them to Russia. We know you don't want to give these weapons to Russia. We know you don't trust the Russians, but you can trust us, the United States. And President Clinton, as I understand it, worked this great deal with Ukraine. Trust us. You can trust us. Yeah, let the Russians have the nuclear weapons that you possess, Ukraine. And we, the United States, will have your back. We'll protect you. Russia wouldn't dare come against you because we will protect you. We'll fight for you. We got your back. And what this administration has done with the Ukrainians' back is put a knife in. Well, you know, there were a lot of Russians in Crimea. Well, yeah, there were. The Russians forced them in there and forced Ukrainians out at one time. Gee, what a great way to claim this land is yours. Force the people out of there. If you want to talk about possession, earlier possession being the right to currently possess, you're going to be hard-pressed to find any Muslim that was a practicing Muslim 1,000 years before Christ. Although you will find the Jews under King David, and you would find King David in the first 7 years of his reign in Hebron, leading Israel from Hebron. And this administration wants to say, that's not Israel's land. People that came along and worshiped Muhammad 1,600 years after King David ruled in this land, they're the ones that should have the land. Really? That's this administration's position? Seriously? What about the prophecies in the Old Testament that in the mountains of Samaria there would be fruit, there would be grapes, be fine wine? For decades, since Israel came back into the land it was promised over 3,000 years ago, people have said, well, you can't grow grapes there in those mountains. We don't know. The prophets really blew that one. You can't grow grapes in that area of Samaria, except that I've been in that area of Samaria where the prophet said Israeli grapes would grow and provide great wine. I don't drink alcohol, but the grapes were amazing. And they're growing where the prophets said they would. So how could land that was in Israel's possession, that was prophesied would be lost by the children of Israel, but God would return them to the area and there would be fine grapes and fruit grown in that area? How could that be somebody else's prior claim when they were longer there than anybody still, any tribes in existence today? Perhaps that is Israel's land, but not according to this administration. This administration's anxious to help those who are the most brutal in all of Israel. So even though we've gotten used to seeing this administration turn its back on an ally in Egypt in favor of a radical Islamist Muslim brother, Morsi, in charge, who, by the way, sent his wife. His wife had a baby in America who could be brought up and taught to hate America. Just like Al-Moody, that's doing over 20 years in prison for supporting terrorism. His wife came to America, had a baby. They've got an American citizen. And actually, it was rather interesting finding out today that Osama bin Laden told his wife to come to America to have her baby. He wanted her to have an American citizen that they could raise up and teach to hate America, who because of their citizenship would be able to come in and out. Fortunately, she ended up in Saudi Arabia, as I understand, before the child was born. But these radical Islamists may be crazy, but they're not stupid. They know as long as we have open borders and welcome people who are pregnant that hate us, they can get in and have baby American citizens, then take them back to their country and over their life, teach them to hate America. I've talked about it for a number of years. There have been the naysayers. And at some point, they'll wise up and see, wow, this has been happening for many years. Well, the same administration that has condemned Israel at different times for not being willing to step up and do what we told them to do, same administration that's left the leader of Israel sitting, waiting for the president for long periods of time while he went and ate, and yet chastised him, well, you stay here and think about it like a child. And when you come to agreement I told you to, then basically, then I'll get back together with you. Like a child? Really? We treat our allies like that? Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu should be thankful, because the way this administration treated the ally leader in Egypt was to have him destroyed, his position, get him out of office, out of power, subject him to torture by the local. Look at the ally that this administration had in Libya. Gaddafi was not a good man, but he was scared so badly after we entered Iraq that he opened his doors. Okay, guys, you know, in America, you tell me what I can keep, what I have to get rid of. I don't want you to invade me, so I'd rather be your friend. You tell me what I can have in the way of weapons. And he really and truly did give up whatever we told him to. And he became an ally. And I've even met Gaddafi's son here at the Capitol before, while President Obama has been president. Apparently, he had meetings here in Washington with the administration, with people on Capitol Hill, and yet this administration not only turned on their ally that they had in Gaddafi, who had supposedly given up his terrorist supporting ways, and this administration supplied weapons into Libya to Al-Qaeda, to other rebels who were not Al-Qaeda, but to Al-Qaeda, to al-Sharia, to other radical Islamists to take out Gaddafi. And some have contended if we had not gone in and bombed Gaddafi's caravan as he was trying to get away, they would not have caught him and he would have gotten out. So it would appear that the United States contributed mightily to the torturous death of Gaddafi. I'm not saying he didn't deserve a rough death after what he had done to so many. Mr. Speaker, I'm just pointing out that this administration agreements and discussions with him as an ally, and they turned on him, threw him away, and not only that, helped bring about his personal death and destruction. But when you deal with Al-Qaeda, when you deal with radical Islam, the Taliban, it's like handling a snake, a poisonous snake. Eventually, it will bite because it's a snake. It's what it does. And now in areas where this administration helped rebels, being a Christian or a Jew is the quickest route to death. This administration, sadly, has helped contribute to situations in the world where there is now more terror if you're a Christian and Jew than there's been in centuries. And so I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but I am a little bit surprised that as Hamas, who does get some of our money, money's fungible, and we're sending it to the Palestinians, and that every dime of it ought to be cut off as long as they have a relationship with Hamas. And yet, because we're sending money that is being used for textbooks and things like street signs that are named for people who have killed innocent Jews, Israelis, Christians, they're contributing to what they're doing. And then this administration, through the FAA, stuck a knife in Israel once again by having the administration, through the FAA, ban U.S. flights to and from Israel's main airport for a second day. And as even CNN reported, it marks another blow to that country's economy and a success for Hamas militants, experts said Wednesday. As one said, quoted in the CNN story, "It is a big hit to the Israeli economy and to our pride," the director of the Civil Aviation Authority of Israel said. But he and other Israeli officials insisted their country's sophisticated anti-missile system makes Ben Gurion Airport a safe place, and even though a Hamas rocket from Gaza fell 1 mile away from the airfield, prompting the FAA temporary ban on U.S. flights, quote, "We knew about that rocket," unquote, said Israeli government spokesman Mark Regev. Quote, "We were tracking it for about 3 minutes, our Air Force. We could have taken it down, but because we saw that it wasn't going to hit inside the airport, we let it go," unquote. For America, Gaza conflict strikes close to home. The FAA ban marks something of a victory for Hamas, as well as prudent decision to protect commercial airlines, one expert said. But his quote included, "What is the objective of terrorists? To incite terror people." That was Tim Clemente, a retired FBI counterterrorism agent, talking about Hamas. Clemente said, "I think because they probably got lucky with this one rocket that came close enough to Ben Gurion, to make it seem like the threat was legitimate." Well, the truth is, maybe Mr. Clemente didn't know, the Israelis were tracking it. They could have shot it down, but there have been so many, a couple of thousand of these rockets have been sent in the last 15 days into Israel. They cannot afford to knock down ones that are not going to harm people or do damage. So they didn't take it down. They could see the trajectory. They knew where it was going to hit. And yet, the Obama administration decides to inflict even more damage on Israel by harming them economically. Oh, we're lifting bans. We're working with Iran, even though Iran said they want to wipe out the little Satan Israel and the great Satan the United States. They've made it clear, and they have never, ever ceased to pursue that dream of wiping out Israel in the United States. Oh, we will give them, some money. We'll let them get proceeds. But when it comes to Israel, we're going to slap them around like a little kid again, even though they have the sophisticated weaponry to knock down rockets, and they let one go because it's not going to hurt anybody. This administration seizes on that to declare a ban on U.S. flights to and from Tel Aviv. Fazwa Baroum, a Hamas spokesman, described the missile landing at the airport as one victory in the ongoing war between Hamas and Israel in Gaza. The resistance success in stopping the air traffic and isolating Israel from the world is a great victory for the resistance, Baroum told Al-Aqsa Television. Great victory for Hamas, great victory for radical Islam. They have gotten the United States administration under President Obama to ban air traffic into Tel Aviv. So we're sticking a knife in our friend. It's not bad enough that Hamas is launching rockets nonstop into Israel, that they have made clear no matter how badly Israel wants a ceasefire, they're not going to stop the rockets. They're hoping they'll kill innocent people because they've made clear before to them, to these terrorists, they don't think there's an innocent child in all of Israel, because ultimately they will be in the military. So they're doing the world a favor, they say, or they think, by killing every Israeli they can. And what does this administration do? It says, let's help Hamas by taking a stab into the heart of Israel's economy. Here's an article from Haaretz.com. Will the threat to Israel's only international airport be a game changer? Whether or not flights in and out of Israel are suspended for any length of time, the suspension of flights by several major air carriers is Hamas's first major achievement of this conflict. Mr. Speaker, it's tragic that the United States is the one who gave Hamas, the radical Islamists, their first big victory. It wasn't Israel that gave them a victory. Israel has defended itself, and that is all they are doing. The article says, with a single rocket which evaded the Iron Dome missile defense system and exploded between two houses in Tel Aviv suburb of Yehud, Hamas might just have achieved what it failed to do with nearly 2,000 rockets fired at Israel since the beginning of this round of warfare 15 days ago. And again, Mr. Speaker, it should be clear, Israel tracked the missile, saw it wasn't going to hit anybody. They let it go. It was not a mistake. It was something they saw would be harmless. They let it go. The Israelis did. But the article says the decision of the United States Federal Aviation Administration to advise the 3 U.S. carriers flying to Israel, Delta, United, and U.S. Airways, to suspend their flights to Israel for 24 hours could just be a temporary blip, another inconvenience caused by the current security situation. If the suspension is extended indefinitely for as long as the rockets are flying, and if it spreads to the airlines of other countries, a number of European carriers have already followed suit, and Korean Air suspended flights already last week. It would create an intolerable situation for the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Further in the article, it says the rocket falling on Yehud did not change that situation. One factor that could have changed the FAA assessment was probably the downing of the Malaysian Airlines Boeing 777 over Ukraine on Thursday, with the deaths of all 298 crew and passengers on board. Tens of thousands of Israelis planning to fly abroad, tourists who were to leave, and those who were scheduled to arrive here in the next few days will have had their plans disrupted. The national carrier, El Al, however, will continue to fly, and since there have been many cancellations already, it will carry many of those who were set to fly on foreign airlines. But the psychological effect on Israelis will be significant, and this could have a long-term implication for Israel's economy. The last time there was a wide-scale suspension of flights to Israel by foreign airlines was not in 2001 after 9/11, when there were continued threats against Israel, or 2002 with continued threats against Israel, or 2003 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8. No, there were no flights suspended from the United States under President George W. Bush's administration, even though the threats at times were probably more severe than now that they have such an effective Iron Dome. There were days before the effective Iron Dome that Israel was probably more at risk than they are with the Iron Dome. But Bush didn't call a suspension. But this administration has. No, the last time there was a wide-scale suspension of flights to Israel by foreign airlines was in early 1991, when Iraqi Scud missiles were falling on Israel during the first Gulf War. Israelis then did not travel abroad as often as they do now, and that conflict did not happen during the vacation period. More significantly, the local economy was not integrated into the global markets as it is today, with hundreds of international companies having research centers in the Israeli high-tech hubs and thousands of companies here totally reliant on export markets. It took Israel's economy many years to break down the reluctance of foreign corporations to invest and work in Israel. A few days or a couple of weeks with limited air travel probably won't change that, but it may well create a temporary feeling of siege. This may prove to be a game changer in a conflict which is now entering its third week. It could provide further impetus for the government in seeking a speedy ceasefire with Hamas, but that seems doubtful. It's much more likely that faced with the prospect of more rockets cutting off Israel from international air routes, the government will be inclined to order a much more devastating blow, a wider ground operation to occupy the rocket launching sites, or even directed at Hamas underground headquarters, with dreadful implications for the people of Gaza living below. And that will be the fault of this administration by failing to put pressure on Hamas, but instead putting pressure on the more reasonable people who have just tried to defend themselves and have made clear, if you stop the rockets, we stop attacking. where all we're seeking is peace. Hamas holds the peace in its own hand, and with that hand, it keeps trying to murder Israelis. And then you end up having discussions in mainstream media, not that hardly is watching, but like on CNN, when one commentator asked another, or I think it was Wolf Blitzer, in effect, gee, these Hamas, they don't have near the weapons that Israel has, so are you seeing any let-up of Israel since they clearly have more fighting power than Hamas? I'm sorry, that's just really a stupid question. If somebody's coming at you with a rock with the intent to murder you and you have a gun, are you supposed to stand aside and say, yeah, beat me as long as you want to till you kill me? I can't use a gun because it's more powerful than your rock. Of course not. You can use self-defense when someone has murderous intent. Israel does have the ability to go in and clean out the weapons in Gaza. I've pointed out to Prime Minister Netanyahu and other leaders in Israel that going back to the very inception of Israel, the very inception, before there was a king, even before there were judges, there has never been a time in Israel's history when Israel gave away its land trying to buy peace, that not only did they not get peace, that land they gave away was used as a staging area from which to attack it. Southern Lebanon, Gaza Strip are just more modern examples. And I didn't understand until I went to Israel for the first time why in the world Israel would be willing to give away more land. But when you're there, you see it among the people. They were tired of suicide bombers. They're tired of rockets. Look, if you'll just leave us alone, we'll give you land. But hopefully Israel's learned a lesson that even though you're tired of the rockets, you're tired of the destruction from Hamas, from radical Islamists, as you were from the PLO, you can't buy peace by giving away your country. Not part of it, not all of it. As long as you exist, they will want to kill you and eradicate you and wipe you out. They've said they will create a worse Holocaust than World War II, and I think they're quite serious. Now, what this administration ought to do for the good of mankind is to recognize that in Hamas are some of the most heinous war crimes in current days, because Hamas is willing to take school children, the sick, the afflicted, families, and put weapons in their homes, their schools, their hospitals, hiding them under, hiding them in. And then when Israel defends itself by taking out the weapons, they get to claim, oh, gee, look, you killed innocent civilians. Shame on you. The Hamas leaders ought to be tried for war crimes, convicted, and killed. They ought to be put to death in a war crime system of justice for using children and innocent people as shields. And this administration ought to be leading the cry against Hamas's exposure to its children and its people. But unfortunately, because some of the American money we've spent is capable of being used to fund school books that teach the children to hate Israelis and hate Americans, hate Jews, hate Christians, You actually have families that say, sure, you want to hide your weapons in here? Gee, if we're taken out by the Israelis, then we're martyred and we'll be heroes. What kind of sick thinking have we contributed to in the region? It's time to cut off every dime that America is giving to the Palestinians, to Hamas, anybody working with Hamas, anybody having any relationship with Hamas. It's time to take President Bush's words that you're either with us or you're against us. If you're doing business with Hamas, if you are helping Hamas, if you are friendly with Hamas, then you are our enemy, and then we ought to enforce that. Israel is standing in defense not only of itself, but of the United States of America, because the radical Islamists represented in Hamas don't just want an end to Israel. Anyone that wants the destruction and end of Israel wants the end and the destruction of the United States of America. And it's time somebody in this administration recognized that. I think there are military leaders that recognize that, and someday they're going to grow a pair and tell the President of the United States that he's helping the wrong side. And God bless him when he does. We even have Jewish self-loathers in this country and in the media, which there have always been, who want to beat up on and vilify Israel when the country just wants to defend itself. But we know this has happened as long as there have been the Jewish people. I mean, go back to World War II. There were actually Jews that went and identified where other Jews lived for the Germans. So is it any surprise that you would have some Jewish people, self-loathing Jews, who would ridicule Israel when it's just trying to defend itself? Here's another article. World suspension of Israel flights, a great victory. Hamas. The success of Hamas in closing Israeli airspace is a great victory for the resistance and is the crown of Israel's failure. That's Hamas spokesman Sami Abu Zuhairi. Well, he should give credit for this administration. This administration is the ones that gave it to him. And then here's an article from Reuters. Netanyahu asked Kerry to help resume U.S. flights to Israel. Well, good luck with that, because as long as they think they're hurting Israel, they're probably going to keep it up. Sure, the president's already got his Nobel Peace Prize. He got that before he really got started. But Secretary Kerry doesn't have his yet, so the only chance he'll have of bringing any peace to the Middle East from his perspective is if you put pressure on the only reasonable group over there, and that's the Israelis. Because they're the only ones that recognize that human life is valuable and we ought to try to save as much as we can. They've showed great restraint in the Gaza Strip. They shouldn't have to. We should clean it up for them. Another article by Andrew McCarthy. Palestinians chose Hamas and the mass murder of civilians, including their own. He posted this July 22nd. Today, we are yet again being inundated with tales of Palestinian woe after Hamas's familiar barbarism has provoked an Israeli military response. It thus bears remembering that the Palestinian people chose Hamas. Whatever happened to all those democracy project plans to self-determination? Hamas is Palestinian self-determination. Hamas was not forced on Palestinians. Hamas did not militarily conquer Gaza. No, Hamas swept parliamentary elections freely held in the Palestinian territories in 2006, thrashing its rival Fatah, which is only marginally less committed to the destruction of Israel. Anyway, Andrew McCarthy quotes from the Wall Street Journal. Gaza overwhelmingly elected Hamas, a terrorist outfit dedicated to the destruction of Israel, as their designated representatives. Almost instantly, Hamas began stockpiling weapons and using them against a more powerful foe with a solid track record of retaliation. What did Gazans think was going to happen? Surely they must have understood on election night that their lives would now be suspended in a state of utter chaos. Life expectancy would be miserably low. Children would be without a future. Staying alive would be a challenge if staying alive even mattered anymore. To make matters worse, Gazans sheltered terrorists and their weapons in their homes, right beside Ottoman sofas and dirty diapers. When Israel warned them of impending attacks, the inhabitants defiantly refused to leave. On some basic level, you forfeit your right to be called civilians when you freely elect members of a terrorist organization or as statesmen, invite them to dinner with blood on their hands, and allow them to set up shop in your living room as their base of operations. At that point, you begin to look a lot more like conscripted soldiers than innocent civilians, and you have wittingly made yourself targets. It also calls your parenting skills into serious question. In the U.S., if a parent is found to have locked his or her child in a parked car on a summer day with the windows closed, a social worker takes the children away from the demonstrably unfit parent. In Gaza, parents who place their children in the direct line of fire are rewarded with an interview on MSNBC where they can call Israel a genocidal murderer. And he also points to this. He says, it's just a warm-up for Jew hatred that pervades the Charter's Article 7. And then he quotes, Hamas is one of the links in the chain of jihad in the confrontation with the Zionist invasion. It links up with the setting of the martyr Izz ad-Din al-Qassam and his brothers in the Muslim Brotherhood who fought the Holy War in 1936. It further relates to another link of the Palestinian jihad and the jihad and efforts of the Muslim Brothers during the 1948 war and to the jihad operations of the Muslim Brothers in 1968 and thereafter. But even if the links have become distant from each other and the obstacles erected by those who revolve in the Zionist orbit, aiming at obstructing the road before the jihad fighters, have rendered the pursuance of jihad impossible. Nevertheless, the Hamas has been looking forward to implement Allah's promise whatever time it takes. The prophet, prayer and peace be upon him, said, the time will not come until Muslims will fight the Jews and kill them, until the Jews hide behind rocks and trees, which will cry, O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me, come on and kill him. This will not apply to the Gurkad, which is a Jewish tree. Anyway, Andrew McCarthy said this is what Palestinians voted for. The highlighted section of Article 7 comes straight from the Islamic scripture, from the authoritative Bukhari and Muslim collections of hadith, the sayings and doings of the Prophet Muhammad. It foretells of an eternal struggle until the end of time when, with Allah's intercession, the rocks and trees will help Muslim battalions find and kill every remaining Jew. Mr. Speaker, this is a dangerous time. Prime Minister Netanyahu seeks the help of his former ally, the United States, not the stabbing in the back by the ally, the United States. I've asked my office to try to set up an appointment with Prime Minister Netanyahu if he would see me this weekend. I know the Sabbath is coming up, but I would find a commercial way to fly in there because I believe in the Israeli people and their ability to keep me safe despite the efforts of the United States in consoling their enemy. Just as my friend Dana Rohrabacher came to me several years ago and said, look, the U.S. State Department saying we can't go into northern Iraq, into Erbil, the Kurdish area, for more than just maybe a meal, because if we do, they won't protect us. They say it's too dangerous. Well, it was the safest area in Iraq, and the Kurdish people were begging for our help. Well, we went in, were protected 3 days, and I know and would put my life in the hands of the Israelis. I trust them, and I wish the rest of the United States would trust them despite this administration. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.